Good evening. Hope everybody's doing well. I'd like to call to order the June 6, 2016 special meeting of the York County School Board. Before we start, I'd like to welcome our newest school board member to his first official special meeting / work session. Mr. Todd Mathis. Todd, is there anything you'd like to say?
I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, we're happy to have you here. All right, we're going to jump right in this evening. We have several presentations, and I'm going to turn it to Dr. Shandor and let you start.
Thank you, Dr. George. Good evening, board members. We have 3 presentations this evening. The first presentation, I'm going to have Mr. Albert Green, Associate Director of School Administration, come to the podium. He's going to present some information to you tonight regarding the 2016-2017 Revised Student Handbook and Conduct Code. Mr. Green.
Good evening, Dr. George, members of the board, and Dr. Shandor. The York County School Division Student Handbook and Conduct Code is revised and published annually in accordance with the regulations and requirements established by the Virginia Department of Education. The handbook revisions are a compilation of recommendations from building principals, central office staff, and the assistant county attorney. The rationale for the modifications is to reflect the Code of Virginia administrative requests and to ensure that the language is consistent with division policies. You have 2 documents before you, one that contains a listing of all of the additions, deletions, and revisions, and another that contains the handbook pages with the changes. Please note that the additions are in red and all deletions are lined through in black. Tonight, although there were some editorial changes, I will only be sharing the substantive changes with you. Please turn to the document that contains the handbook pages with changes entitled 2016-2017 Student Handbook and Conduct Code Changes in Board Docs. The front and back cover, the inside of the front cover, the introduction page, testing dates, forms, and the table of contents were all updated to reflect personnel and calendar changes and adjustments to align with the 2016-2017 calendar. Therefore, you do not have those pages since they were merely name and date changes. We will begin with page 1. On page 1, under the attendance heading, there were revisions. Language referencing the No Child Left Behind Act has changed to the Every Student Succeeds Act, which replaced it. Also on page 1, information about excessive absences has been defined as 10 or more, and the number 5 replaced 6 for the number of unexcused absences a student can accumulate before a complaint could be filed in juvenile and domestic relations court to align with the current code. On page 3, this information on the Children's Online Protection Act was deleted because it is referenced elsewhere in the handbook under the AUP policy, and I'll mention that in a bit. On page 6, changes were made in regard to where information can be accessed for family life education. On page 11, information was added informing parents that students should be kept home until they are asymptomatic for 24 hours before returning to school. Also on page 11, information was added to the concussion guidelines to ensure that students' cognitive demands are being considered in the event of concussions. On page 13, the hotline phone number was updated, and a statement was added to inform callers that they can leave a voicemail at any time. On page 14,
should we ask questions as we go?
I'll have time at the end for questions. Yes, ma'am. On page 14, information was added regarding the online lunch payment service, My School Bucks, with additional specificity. Also on page 14, information was added regarding the distribution and availability of free lunch applications. Finally, on page 14, this is where the Children's Online Protection Act information was moved under the AUP policy heading with additional details as I mentioned earlier. On page 15, additional information was added regarding the limitations that would be caused by parents who select to opt out of network usage for their students. Information was also added indicated that the only exception would be for mandated testing. Additionally, on page 15, information was added under item 2 of user privileges to indicate that email accounts will be assigned to all students and that students under 13 years of age can only receive email from within the division. On page 16, information was added forbidding students to use their own various privately owned Wi-Fi services within the schools. On page 18, wording was changed for better fluency for the plagiarism policy. Also on page 18, specific information contained in the code that requires the Pledge of Allegiance with instructions for the proper way to salute the flag have been added. That wasn't there previously. Finally, on page 18, under the Bring Your Own Technology policy, the words "or similar" were added to the BYOT policy, forbidding students from utilizing their own internet provider's Wi-Fi in case new Wi-Fi technology develops. Beginning on the bottom of page 23 and on to page 24 are additions to the emergency preparedness section that align with our new crisis management handbook, and there was also a title change. On page 26, the Stanford Achievement Test has been replaced with the Iowa Test of Basic Skills because there was a change. We are now giving the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. On page 27, information on the preliminary Scholastic Aptitude Test has been revised for clarity. As a reminder to the public, as part of the FY17 budget adoption, the York County School Division will now be covering the costs of the PSAT for students who would like to take that. On page 33, under buses, for safety reasons, a phrase has been added indicating that parents should not board buses at any time without permission. Also on page 33, under volunteers, information has been added informing the public of the volunteer information that can be found on our website. On page 35, civics was added to the study of history and social sciences at the elementary level to align with current standards. On page 40, all references to the special diploma have been replaced with applied studies diploma in accordance with Virginia Department of Education changes. Also on page 40, under the GED certificate, 5 was changed to 4, and the types of tests were changed to reflect current testing requirements. As you know, those changed in the last couple of years as well. Page 41 was updated to add the additional diploma seal type, the seal of biliteracy, that was added by the Virginia Department of Education for 2016-2017 for students who demonstrate aptitude in multiple languages. On page 53, an offense code has been added, BA6, assault and battery without injury, and the range of consequence levels 3 and 4 were added for K through 12. This was added by the Virginia Department of Education to allow divisions to utilize the assault and battery code without reporting to law enforcement. That may be particularly helpful at the elementary level with those type of things. On page 58, under item 14, harassment, the word repeatedly has been replaced with annoying in the description because harassment can in some cases involve just one incident. On page 62, asterisks have been added to all theft incidents because they are all required to be reported to law enforcement. Also on page 62, a new tobacco code was added, TB2, for electronic cigarettes and vaporizer pens in accordance with Virginia Department of Education changes, and the range of consequence levels 3 and 4 for K through 12 were added because, of course, those items are prohibited on school grounds. On the bottom of page 66, under a parent-guardian right of appeal, more clarity and specificity was added at the request of building principals. In addition to everything should be in writing, so on page 67, in writing was added to all appeals to align with our current appeals practices. We request those in writing, but we thought it should be reflected in the code of conduct to make it clear for parents. And finally, on page 84, the student-parent technology use form was changed substantially to clearly illustrate the restrictions that would be caused if parents opt out of network services and internet usage. This concludes the proposed changes, additions, and deletions to the 2016-2017 Student Handbook and Conduct Code. A request for approval would come before the board at the June 17th regular meeting. Are there any questions?
Couple, if I may. Your hotline on page 13. Who answers the hotline, and how quickly is that reviewed and responded to?
That's answered daily by division staff.
At the end of the day, is it something, suppose you get a phone call that morning and you don't answer it to the end of the day. Is there a perusal? Is there some way like a binging, like your cell phones ring out? Is there any way of knowing when something comes into the hotline and how quickly you respond to it?
Well, there are lights on several people's telephones that indicates there is a message waiting on the hotline. And they could answer the line if somebody's there, or they can check that voicemail at any time when they see that there's a message waiting.
And who would normally be checking that? I mean, is there if it's on a number of people's phones, that link or what have you, who then in turn responds?
The Department of School Administration.
Okay, it comes to me,
Okay,
and I answer it.
okay, okay.
And I follow up with that.
And usually it's done in a very fast manner.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We've got it on so many phones that it's like
Okay,
impossible
that's
to
good
be
to know.
missed.
Okay.
We make sure that gets caught.
Okay, that was all.
Any issue of student or staff safety takes first priority, so we address that immediately.
And my other question, just in general, I know in the past when there have been concerns school division wide, and we have had, as a board, had to tighten up our policy, so to speak. Say it's dress code, say it's whatever. Have there been concerns over the last year that have surfaced from a variety of places, whether it be parents, students, different principals, to say that there are areas we need to tighten our policy upon?
We formed a committee to go through the handbook, and none of those arose through the committee, as well as we haven't received any pervasive concerns.
I use just dress code as an example because there was a time we felt as a board that we need to send a stronger message. And principal said, that's all we would be doing during the day is dealing with dress code. Don't make it so tight. So I was just curious if there were other concerns that we as a board would have to address.
None that really stood out, either in the committee or that
Okay.
were reported from other sources.
I had a question about the hotline number. I noticed it had changed. When does that change take effect?
It's in effect now. It took effect at the beginning of the school year.
Okay, super, thank you.
Ledford? Mr.
Nope, I'm
Mathis,
good.
anyone?
Page 33, you mentioned about parents not boarding school buses except if they have permission. Permission from who? The bus driver, the school, principal, teachers? Where's the permission coming from?
Right, that would, on the front line from the bus driver. We just don't want folks getting on the buses without a
And they're all
staff
aware of
member's
that,
permission.
I'm assuming, correct? They're aware that they have authority not to allow anybody on the bus that they don't want, I'm
Yes, sir.
assuming.
Right, Mr. Mathis, on the bus, there's a no trespassing sign. And there will be times for parents on the bus, a field trip, their chaperones and all of that, and that's by permission of the school and the teacher or the coach for that particular activity, so we would allow parents. But sometimes there have been some issues where parents wanted to board the bus along a route, and that's primarily why that's in the handbook. We don't, we would like for parents not to board the bus during the course of a route. If there's a concern, then contact the school or transportation to work through that particular issue without addressing it or getting on the bus to talk to the bus driver.
One last question. Page 11, under illnesses and concussion. Concussion specifically, who, is this something that's gone, is this health advisory committee, or how did these determinations, what guided your change for this?
That's actually from guidance from the Virginia Department of Education. One of the things they felt was that, and you can find guidance on their website and other sources, but they felt that we were making sure kids were physically able to come back, but they felt like the cognitive demands that were being put on students, maybe they weren't quite ready for them. So they call it a return to learn protocol. And it's also something that's supported by the Virginia High School League.
So that's from the state. Okay, under illnesses, just this contagious symptoms, this change, was this made, I'm curious, does the Health Advisory Committee make those types of changes?
They weigh in on those.
Okay.
But that was primarily our school nurses requested that change.
So the nurses are, okay,
Just to
great.
keep the kids. They were seeing kids coming back too soon and they were
Yeah.
affecting other students, so we thank
So
for that.
the biggest thing is you had medical people weighing in on this, basically.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Guy, did you have a comment to make?
Yes, with respect to the PSAT and the school board approving in the budget the provision to pay for the PSAT, that's for all 10th graders, not all students. That's the 10th graders that we would pay for the PSAT.
I had one more
Important point.
question too.
Sure.
Are we gonna?
Yeah.
Okay. The question about the Wi-Fi. I know it's in the code of conduct, but do the teachers and the principals, especially at the high school level, really push students to connect to the YCSD Wi-Fi and not to use Verizon or AT&T, their hotspot or anything like that? That's the first time I had noticed that, and I just wondered, I'm assuming it's so they don't go on their own device and site and access bad materials, inappropriate material.
Yes, absolutely. They're encouraged to use the YCSD Wi-Fi because we do have filters, age-appropriate filters for those items. And you'll see on there that we restricted 4G or similar because we don't know where technology will go. It could be 5G, 6G, whatever, and that's why that verbiage was there on similars because it's so rapidly changing. It could change during the course of this year before we implement next year's handbook, and so that's why that verbiage is there.
Okay.
Great.
Can I ask one more question based on something Dr. Guy said, PSAT? And I know I've heard this before, but it just triggered the question. 10th grade is the most appropriate time for taking PSAT. If a child does not take it in 10th grade and not take it into the 11th grade, they've missed that opportunity. So then, as an 11th grader, we don't pay for a PSAT.
No, in the 11th grade, when they're taking the PSAT, they're typically competing at that point in time for the National Merit Scholarships. And so we're paying for the 10th grade because it's a good precursor at that point in time to get information to help the student prepare for the SAT.
The reason I was asking that, so we need to do more with getting kids in the rising 9th grade to be mindful that they need to be prepared and preparing to take PSAT in 10th grade.
And we will be sending out communications to our parents and to our students with regard to the PSAT in the 10th grade. It occurs on October 15th. I will share we have a known conflict with Yorktown Day, but we can't determine the College Board sets that date. There is an alternative date, so students who might be involved in Yorktown Day activities would be provided that opportunity in November to take the alternative. But we can't take the entire population in York County and move on to the November date.
It'd be interesting to find out the percentage of 10th graders who take it in this year.
That would be an incentive.
It's during the school day. October 15th
Right,
is a
but-
school day, and so if they're in school, they'll be taking the test.
I think you mean comparing it to last year.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Because they would have to sign up to take it.
I'll check it.
It's not given in school, just like you come in and take a test. You have to sign up to take it.
But the ACCs will work on making
Okay.
sure that they're signed up.
That'd be October 19th, 15th was a Saturday.
Okay,
And that would
so
be-
I have to look at the date again. So it's what day is Yorktown
Yorktown
Day?
Day is
19.
19th.
Then that is the day, thank you.
And the College Board and the Khan Academy have partnered together
Yeah.
and provide a wealth of training information online for students.
Kids generally take the PSAT once. They don't necessarily retake like they do the SAT.
No,
correct?
you typically have students that'll take the PSAT in the 10th grade, and then they'll take it in the 11th grade where they're competing for the National Merit Scholarship Program.
And we're paying for the 10th grade, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well,
But what they do now is after you take the PSAT, they
Log on.
You can go through Khan Academy and it can help you improve on the questions that you answered incorrectly, so you're prepared for the SAT.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Mr. Green.
All right, let's move to our next presentation. Dr. Shandor, could you introduce that, please?
Absolutely. I'm going to have Mr. Tony Vladu, Director of Secondary Instruction, come to the podium. He's going to present an update regarding the exam committee recommendations. If you recall, board members, the last couple of years, we've had some weather issues. Unfortunately, they happen typically during exams. So Mr. Vladu spearheaded a committee, and he's going to share those findings with us. Mr. Vladu?
Thank you, Dr. Shandor. Good evening, Chairman George, school board members, and Dr. Shandor. As you may remember, the high school credit-bearing courses for this semester exams have been impacted by inclement weather in 2 out of the last 3 years. To better anticipate and plan for similar scenarios in the future, we solicited feedback from schools to the formation of a high school credit-bearing exam committee. Tonight, I'll be providing a presentation on the process as well as the recommendations made by the committee. The 2015-2016 administration of first semester exams for high school credit-bearing courses was impacted due to inclement weather and school cancellations, which occurred on the last full instructional day and the 2 exam days during the scheduled semester exams. In order to solicit feedback from schools as we rescheduled and made adjustments to the high school courses exams, this past winter, more than six conferences were held with middle and high school principals. Multiple factors were considered in rescheduling the exams. As a result of losing instructional time prior to the scheduled exams, the provision of the exam reviews to students was an important consideration. After the administration of the rescheduled exams, additional feedback was provided by school staff. In order to consult on potential future weather events and their impact on the administration of semester exams, an exam committee was thus formed. The role of the exam committee was to provide input and provide viable courses of action for future weather-related exam administration scenarios. The exam committee consisted of representatives from each middle and high school. Participants included school board office staff, building administrators, and teacher representatives. Teacher representatives were selected with regard to course level and division programs. For instance, world language, special education, IB, advanced placement, School of the Arts, and York River Academy teachers were included in the makeup of the exam committee. During late April and early May, the committee met on 3 different occasions. The role of the committee was to provide consultation and guidance to the decision-making process should similar events occur in both the near and more distant future. The goal of the committee was to use the lessons learned in order to provide guidelines to the use of parameters in the decision-making process. At the conclusion of each meeting, the meeting notes are provided to both committee members as well as the middle and high school principals. It is sound instructional practice to provide opportunities for students to review previously learned material. Written exam reviews help both students and teachers focus on important skills and knowledge needed to demonstrate mastery of learned concepts. Based on feedback from various stakeholders, exam reviews were an important consideration in administering the rescheduled semester exams. To that end, the committee identified existing practices at each school and made the following recommendations. First, though written exam reviews may be provided at any time during the second quarter, they are required to be provided to students no later than 2 weeks before the beginning of the exam window. Secondly, Students must be provided with the opportunity to correct common misconceptions prior to the administration of exams. This may be done by posting answers to exam reviews online prior to their administration or conducting an in-class review. Next, the committee considered the parameters for the cancellation of exams. The committee considered the impact on instructional time resulting from missing multiple days of school before, during, and after the scheduled exams. Similarly, the loss of instructional time during the second semester was another consideration in making the following recommendations. First, semester exams will be canceled if 4 or more days are missed during the week prior to the scheduled exams. However, because written exam reviews are provided well in advance of the exams and answers may be provided electronically to platforms such as Aspen or Edmodo, if less than 4 days are missed in the week before exams, there will be no delay in the administration of scheduled exams. Second, semester exams will be canceled if 3 or more days are missed during the scheduled exam week. For instance, if 2AB or the first exams are administered and 3 scheduled exams after the 2AB's exam is administered are canceled as a result of inclement weather, exams will also be canceled. Third, if semester exams are pushed into the second semester as a result of inclement weather, and if the rescheduled exams cannot be completed within the first 2 school days of the second semester, then exams are also canceled. Lastly, it is common practice for performing courses such as those in SOA, School of the Arts, World Language, Drama, Art, and Band that have performance components to the semester exams. These performance components are completed prior to the exam schedule. It was the recommendation of the committee that when performance exam components are completed prior to the semester exams in all relevant courses, these performances will be counted as a second quarter test grades if exams are canceled. If history is to be a guide, it is difficult to both anticipate every weather scenario as well as its impact on school and exam schedules. However, the cancellation of exams as it relates to parameters relating to missing days before, during, and after exams, as well as the provision of exam reviews well in advance, reduces the need to reschedule exams. In reviewing the conversation this past winter, when exams are rescheduled, it is very important to our schools to keep the original order of exams. For instance, it is a common practice for students to prioritize study time and prepare for exams in the order they are originally scheduled. Accordingly, after much consideration, the committee is recommending that if semester exams are rescheduled, the exams will be administered in the originally published sequence. The committee also made several recommendations should exam become optional. It is important to remember that as in years past, optional exams will only count if it benefits the student's grade. While the grading of optional exams is consistent with past practice, there are some changes to the administration of optional exams. For instance, when all exams cannot be administered and exams become optional, only students electing to take the exams will do so. Now I would like to take a few moments to review our next steps. At the conclusion of each meeting and after the very last meeting, the meeting notes as well as the actionable recommendations have been provided to all members of the committee and the middle and high school principals. The final recommendations of the committee were provided to principals at the May principals meeting, and we solicited feedback. The principals also reviewed this information with their leadership teams at each school. The exam committee also recommended that this information is shared with school staff, students, and parents upon returning to school this fall. The committee also recommended the provision of school-based professional development in effectively developing appropriate exam reviews as it relates to subject area, course level, and the grade level of students. Lastly, if there are any changes to the school calendar as a result of inclement weather during the scheduled exams, there are additional logistical implications that will need to be considered in light of these recommendations made by the committee. As I conclude this presentation, I want to thank the teachers and staff who served on the exam committee, particularly at this very busy time of the year. It is not feasible at best to predict the impact of every weather scenario on our schools. However, the committee developed a set of parameters that will be particularly helpful in guiding the decision-making process when the exam schedule will be impacted by weather. Thank you for the opportunity to present the recommendations of the committee. This concludes my presentation, and I now welcome your questions and answers.
Thank you for coming up with the blueprint for this, because I know both the years when we had all of the snow and the bad weather during the midterm week, I received numerous calls, emails, text messages from students and parents. What do we do about our test tomorrow? And then will we have that test the following day, or will we go back on the schedule? And it created an enormous amount of stress. So I think it's very wise to have the plan laid out and communicated.
Thank you, and our teachers did an outstanding job in providing those recommendations. We had good discussion on every single option and scenarios, and I think we have a nice set of parameters to guide our decisions.
Well thought out.
And I guess
How will
my,
this be- I'm sorry.
I know, yeah, I listened to the presentation. Of course, I'm thinking that it's a little complicated when all the different pieces and parts in there. So I can see some of the students hoping for poor weather and some not, of course, because one test may get their grade a little higher than, or not benefit them in some cases. Students, I don't want to dilute this too much because I think exams are important to the course. So I like the fact that you kept a piece in there that they're going to do some more prep work earlier into or as they leading up to. But students will be preparing for that exam the entire semester as they're grasping the knowledge and retaining knowledge, because that's what they're being tested on, is what they retain from the course. The review helps. I'm with Cindy, the blueprint, thank goodness now something's consistent, but I'm going to step back and kind of see how this thing rolls, because I don't want the value of the exam to be kind of lessened or not as important, because I feel like that for students, that's what they need. The ones that are going to go on to higher ed, they need to understand the importance of that test at the end of the course. And I think in our high schools, we've done a good job with the courses and preparing students for higher ed beyond high school, by preparing them for what is an exam going to look like. What do you need to prepare for? What do you need to study for? What do you need to retain to pass that course or to pass that exam? So good start, but I'm not, my verdict's still out on this, but the committee did a lot of work, obviously, and thought through a lot, so.
How will we communicate this?
This will be, for instance, the first step was to communicate it to the leadership teams at the school. So I talked to our principal to make sure that it happened. In the fall, what we want to do is communicate it through a reg memo that informs folks of what needs to be done and when. But I think the key is actually to work with our principals in ensuring that everybody in their school communities, that parents and students know. And also, I think it's going to generate some very nice conversation about exactly what you said. What is a good exam review? You've seen exam reviews that it's everything in the kitchen sink. And so where do you start versus exam review that target some very important skills, because not everything in the course gets exactly the same weight or a curriculum. So I think it's going to generate some nice conversation and professional development at each school. So that's a start about communicating these changes.
And Dr. George, we'll work with our communications and public relations person, Ms. Goff, with respect to how do we communicate that information out with regard to the division website and with respect to school-based websites as well. So we'll work on developing a plan to communicate that so that folks are well aware of what the what to anticipate.
You just don't want a
And what to
scenario
hope
where
for.
it's inconsistent. You
Right.
don't want, you
Yes.
don't want that for sure. So
Yeah.
you wanna make sure.
Was there discussion among the committee about, when teaching kind of doesn't stop, but we're going from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to chapter 3, but now if we push that review a little earlier to begin, does that squeeze the time that a teacher needs to cover materials before they start kicking into now we're backing up and reviewing versus it does not?
We had some discussion about that, and well, the important part is to find out what was happening already, so we can look at it. For instance, there are teachers that are devoting 10 minutes a day, every other, whenever they see the kids, just to review some certain concepts, so they don't impact instructional time. I do think when the committee discussed that when this exam review is provided earlier, it just allows everybody to plan better. That doesn't mean it should impact, we should stop what we're doing and start reviewing for the exams. I think a good exam review should be chunked, so we do 10, 15 minutes and do that rather than saving for the last day. So there was some discussion on that.
I would also think with probably, 50% of our students, high school students, taking AP courses, you're starting late because you have to start after Labor Day. So you're behind what most of the teachers in other school divisions have been able to accomplish in the last 2 weeks of August or first week in September. So you're time crunched then. You've got your eye on that big AP test, and you're trying to get through all of that information then for the midterm. So I can see where there would be a crunch for the AP exams. And, do they give a midterm review guide the week before the midterm test? That may happen too, but I think that is something to look at.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lawrence. Appreciate it.
Let's hope for good weather.
All right, that's right, it's hard to think about snow and cancellation this time of the year.
Thank you, Mr. Bladue.
Okay, Dr. Schuster.
All right, our final presentation for the evening is going to be Mr. Mark Shearhart, Associate Director for Capital Plans. He's going to provide information about projects that are included in the capital improvement plan for FY18 through FY22. The board will recall you voted and approved the FY17 CIP at our last school board meeting. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Shearhart.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and Dr. Shandor. Displayed on the screen is an updated capital improvement program. The scope of the program has been reduced from the 10-year FY17 to FY26 CIP previously approved by the school board to the 6 years FY17 to FY22 that the county has requested. Last month, the school board approved this FY17 expenditures. We recommend the changes made to the fiscal years FY18 through FY22 to you tonight for approval at the June 17th special meeting. At this time, I'd like to briefly focus on just a few of the projects in this plan. The first of these is the Tabb Middle School HVAC replacement project, which is at the bottom of page 1. This project was previously scheduled to be completed in FY21 for $2.5 million. If you notice, it is no longer scheduled in the condensed CIP since it was delayed beyond FY22. The third project on page 2, the Bruton High School HVAC replacement project, is also no longer shown since it too has been rescheduled beyond FY22. I'm just trying to explain some of the gaps you see here. You see the projects up there and no numbers next to those projects, and that's why the gaps, because these projects have been moved out beyond FY22. On page 3, the 6th project down is the Tabb Elementary School roof replacement project. And this project has been moved from FY17 to FY22. And this is due in part to the fact that we feel like the aluminum roof there can handle a few more years of life until we have the funding to replace that roof. On page 4, the 5th project down, is the Tabb Middle School shingled roof replacement. And this project will remain where it was originally proposed. We were able to keep it in that location. On page 5, the 3rd project down is the Mount Vernon Elementary School breezeway enclosure. This unfortunately has been moved from FY18 to FY19, and this is due to funding constraints. On page 6, the 4th project from the bottom of the sheet, the temporary modular classrooms.
It's not there. Stops at page 5.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, so on page 6, you have it in your board docs. On page 6, the fourth project down from the bottom of the sheet, the temporary modular classrooms. The amount in FY18 remains at $200,000. The amount in FY19 was increased by $1 million to $1,150,000 for additional modular classrooms if needed. Please notice that $400,000 was inserted in FY20, $300,000 in FY21, and $300,000 in FY22 to pay for leasing these additional modular classrooms as well as continuing the leases on the first 2 sets of classrooms. On page 7, the 5th project down is the Queens Lake Middle School bus loop and parking lot expansion that was moved from FY19 to FY21. Do the board members not have? You do have the.
We have the copies.
Yeah, it's just here.
Just the one on the screen, okay, great. So on page 7, this project down is the expansion of the bus loop in the parking lot. On the last page, page 8, the second project on the page is the new elementary school. Note that the $23 million cost has been spread across FY18 for $13,800,000 and FY19 for $9,200,000. At the bottom of the final page, on page 8, notice that the total for each year is within the amount approved by the York County Board of Supervisors each fiscal year. Do you have any questions about specific projects or the CIP as a whole?
I'm sorry, go ahead. I just think the areas that, because we are now at 6 years versus the 10 years, and some of the projects that we wanted to do are not shown here. So we're hoping that the buildings continue to withstand and not have major problems. But if something happens that's out of the 6-year period, then we'll have to renegotiate with the county to get that area completed or repaired or what have you. Just because it's out of the 6 years doesn't mean that it's gonna, we hope nothing will happen. But you're always concerned about that because you don't see it.
Sure.
I think that's a very important comment to make so the public knows. It may, this document goes to FY22 and those items are past that, but that does not mean that they are forgotten. They're on a preliminary document in our, at the school board office, just not the official one.
We'll still maintain 10 years on the facility master plan, but we're just gonna show the 6 years in the facility and in the capital improvement plan. So we still will maintain the 10-year outlook.
And we'll review this every year.
Yes.
So every year we review this, we'll prioritize projects and projects that need to be adjusted one way or another, we'll take care of each year.
Just a comment, I understand why it's where it is now as a 6-year CIP. I still have concerns with that, but like Cindy says there, and you, Mark, it's on, other items are on another list. We know that they exist. We know they're coming up. YCSD is the largest infrastructure owner in the county. I mean, as far as buildings and just all the parts and pieces that go into our infrastructure. So I brought this up before, and I'll bring it up again, I guess, and that is, y'all do a fantastic job, Mark and Carl and your team, that you are always looking and walking the buildings and just looking and studying to figure out what's going to fail next or what needs to be replaced so it doesn't. But do we need to have a third-party qualifier come in and look at everything that y'all have gathered as far as data and say, you're right on, I mean, you're right where you need to be, or this is going to cost you more if you wait versus doing it now? And I ask that because I think that if it gets into a situation like Mrs. Haywood mentions, to where and you know what's going to happen, but we don't have the funding to cover it, and we try to push it out a year or two, and then all of a sudden it fails, I'd rather have information, third-party qualified, I guess, to say, okay, funding source, we can't wait any longer. This is not going to make it. So that's just where I'm at with this, because I think that for us as a staff, school board, to have to juggle and prioritize, it puts us in a corner sometimes because there may be competing pieces of our infrastructure. They're really, how do you choose A, B, or C when all three need to be taken care of? So, have y'all had any more discussion on a qualifier?
Carl, you want to respond to that?
You know, we haven't had that discussion. We've been working through a number of things to work with the level of funding, but that's an approach that we could take to see what's available out there to us to qualify what we believe which status our bills and what should be in the CIP.
I'd be happy to help you a little bit with maybe some prioritizing and making strong arguments for your no-kidding top priority items based on kind of what I do. It's nothing you need to follow, but they're when we run into budget problems, our high priority items, we make very, very, very good cases of why this cannot be pushed. And so just some things that I get from my work, I'd be more than happy to share with you guys on.
Great. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that was my proposed bill.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sherhart.
Appreciate that. Okay, we have one item under financial matters, a resolution 16-31, resolution authorizing specific procurement. Mr. Medford, you were going to share some additional information this evening?
Yes, I talked to our Chief Financial Officer, referenced this document, Dennis Jarrett. So a couple of things to highlight, because it is extensive. Using FY16 dollars, if you notice, it's a total of $237,943 for a closed circuit, our camera replacements and such for security at York Middle, York High. And then, of course, the chiller replacement that just can't be put off. That was one of those things at Tab Middle School that we're going to have to find the money and had to buy it because it needed to be replaced. So that's $148,000. You'll see under FY17, there's a couple of things, like the first one, the roof replacement at Grafton, roof replacement and coating. It's an estimate of $2 million for Grafton High, Grafton Middle. That's a CIP project. The A&E services, third one down, system replacement for Tab Elementary is a CIP project for $350,000 estimated. If you flip the page, you'll see quite a few items that are just a setting up of the purchase orders for next year. So you'll see just a lot of those janitorial, solid waste, stuff like that. If you go down a little bit further, you'll see the student information system renewal for Aspen of $91,900. There's A&E for roof replacement at York High School. You'll see the $120,000 there for just the design of what they're going to do. Something interesting, if you look at our property and liability insurance, this is not a self-insured piece. This is actually a policy, has $335,732. And then two more CIP projects to mention, which is the Yorktown Elementary School roof replacement, HVAC systems, and building expansion of $5 million estimated. And then the Bethel Manor Elementary School, 300 and 400 hallway renovations, a little over $3 million estimate CIP there. So, and then New Horizons, obviously, special education coming in at $700,000. But it's just gearing up for FY17 as we roll into it. So I move resolution 16-39.
Do I have a second? Second. Any questions?
A motion made by Mr. Medford and seconded by Mrs. Haywood to approve resolution 16-39. Mrs. Karski?
Yes.
Mrs. Haywood?
Yes.
Mr. Medford?
Yes.
Mr. Medford?
Yes.
And Dr. George?
Yes. Thank you. And next we have our consent agenda. We have several items. I'm just going to briefly touch on them. The first one, donations. Consideration of a motion to approve the superintendent to execute a lease between the Boys and Girls Club and Queens Lake Middle School. Consideration of approval, resolution 16-45 to approve fiscal year 2016 property and liability insurance. Consideration of a motion to approve the agreement between the County School Board of York and the York-Pocosin Sheriff's Office for the 2016-17 year. Consideration of a motion to authorize the superintendent to execute a lease between the County School Board of York and Bethel Baptist Church for the use of a softball field. And the final one, consideration of approval of minutes from a regular and special meeting on April 25th, 29th, May 3rd, May 4th, May 12th, and May 19th. We are going to pull, you'll need to pull F and do that separately. Mr. Mathis was not on the board for those meetings. So if we could, at this point, I'd like to move approval of the consent calendar, items A through E.
Second.
Ms. Ford?
A motion is made by Dr. George and seconded by Mrs. Kersky to approve the consent calendar with the exception of F. Mr. Medford?
Yes.
Mrs. Haywood?
Yes.
Mr. Mathis?
Yes.
Mrs. Kersky?
Yes.
And Dr. George?
Yes, thank you. I'd like a motion to approve the consent calendar, item F.
So moved.
Second.
A motion is made by Mrs. Kersky and seconded by Mr. Medford to approve item F. Mr. Mathis?
Abstain?
Mrs. Haywood?
Yes.
Mrs. Kersky?
Yes.
Mr. Medford?
Yes.
And Dr. George?
Yes. Okay, very good. We're now in need of a closed session, so if I could have a motion and a second to take us into closed session.
I move the York County School Board convene in closed session pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act under Virginia Code 2.2-3711A 29 to discuss a contract matter.
Second. Go ahead.
Got that? Ms. Ford?
A motion is made by Mr. Medford and seconded by Mrs. Haywood to approve a motion to go into closed session. Mrs. Kersky?
Yes.
Mr. Mathis?
Yes.
Mrs. Haywood?
Yes.
Mr. Medford?
Yes.
And Dr. George?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Have a good evening.